Hi, my name is Dawn Rowe, and I'm here today to talk a little bit about Transition Indicators 101, and give you an overview of the federal reporting requirements at the state and local levels. The purpose of this session is really for you to get some knowledge about federal and state Part B Indicators 1, 2, 13, and 14 data collection and reporting requirements. Also to gain a better understanding of how these data are collected, how they're reported, and how they're used at both the state and local levels. And then really understanding some implications of these data for local improvement, planning, and use. The purpose of IDEA is really to ensure that all children with disabilities have a free and appropriate public education that's really focused on results, preparing them for further education, employment, and independent living skills. And this is ultimately what we're all trying to achieve. But the big question is how do we know that the services and supports that we provide while youth are in school are contributing to achieving the purpose of IDEA? So the federal government has also kind of asked this big question, and so in order to measure how well schools are achieving the purpose of IDEA, they're requiring states to develop state performance plans that have to be updated at least every 6 years, and then also to report annually on the performance of each local education agency and the state on the targets in the state performance plan. It's called the SPP APR, so that's what I'll refer to it throughout. So federal requirements, there are actually 17 Part B indicators. They've been chosen by the federal government because they've been found to related to improved outcomes for youth with disabilities. Some are compliance indicators, which means the targets have to be 100%, where others are performance indicators, and that means that the states are allowed to set targets for those indicators. But for each indicator, annual targets are established. There is the 17th indicator, which is kind of new and is still proposed at this point, called the SSIP, the State's Systemic Improvement Plan. And this is really proposing a certain priority area, or for states to focus on priority areas. And so today we're going to talk about one priority area states could focus on, which is the area of transition. So the 4 indicators that are specific to transition are indicator Part B1, which is the percent of youth who graduate. Indicator B2, which is the percent of youth who drop out. Indicator B13, which is the percent of youth who are required to have compliant transition components in the IEP. And then B14 are the percent of youth who achieve various post-school outcomes of employment, education. There's a critical relationship between all of these indicators. So the quality IEPs, indicator 13, is really what happens while youth are in school. It's the transition services and supports that are provided to youth while they're in school. And these ultimately lead to helping youth stay in school, which is reducing the dropout rate, which is indicator 2. And then graduating with a diploma, which is indicator 1. So as youth progress through and graduate from high school, those quality transition services and supports provided while they're in school really influence the positive outcomes of youth with disabilities after they leave school. So that's indicator 14. So they're having better education and employment outcomes depending on what you do while they're in school. So we're going to briefly overview data collection and reporting efforts for each of the 4 indicators. And we'll start with indicators 1 and 2, graduation and dropout rates. So graduation indicator B1 is the percent of youth with IEPs graduating with a regular diploma or a standard diploma. The data source really is aligned with the ESEA, which is the Secondary Education Act. States have to report using the rate calculation and the timelines established under Title I. So all states are now reporting the same way. There is a 1-year data lag. So when you're reviewing the data for use, you'll notice that the year will be 1 year behind, but that is the most recent data. And I'll show you a table that kind of illustrates that. And sampling is not allowed for graduation. You're calculating graduation rates of all youth who leave. So here's an example of what the PowerPoint's available to you on the website, but the table in the slide illustrates for you the lag year. So in FFY 2012, that data is actually school year data, 2011-12, and it's reported in 2014. Same for 2013, it's the FFY 2013, but the school year is 2012-13, and it's reported in February 2015. Sometimes this can be a little confusing, even for me. I have to have a cheat sheet in front of me as I work. So this is how ESA, there's an adjusted cohort calculation method too, and this is how the formula for calculating graduation rates. And it really is the percent of youth graduating with, or youth with IEPs graduating with a regular diploma. And there's a pretty simple formula for doing that. And the top number, the numerator, is really the number of youth with IEPs who graduate in 4 years with a regular diploma, divided by the number of youth who entered school 4 years earlier, adjusting for those students who may have transferred in or out or passed away. So it's really important. Again, we're calculating all students in 4 years. So there's also an extended year rate that some states provide. It really gives states and districts some credit for students who take longer. So we know youth with disabilities sometimes take longer to graduate, and longer than 4 years, sometimes maybe 5. And so some states have applied to use an extended year rate in addition to their 4-year rate. So they report both to give them a more adequate picture of how many youth are graduating with standard diplomas. It is arranged between individual states and the Department of Special Ed, and it's not limited to specific groups of students, or just like students with disabilities or English language learners. They would do it for all students. So the targets, timelines, and reporting. So the targets are the same as the annual graduation rates set under Title I for ESEA. They really are describing the results of the data for the year, the reporting year. Again, sampling is not allowed, and you're providing actual numbers to use for the calculation. A lot of times in the SPP, the APR, states will provide narrative that describes those conditions that the youth must meet in order to graduate with a regular diploma, because those requirements are different across states, and it may also be different for youth with IEPs, and if that's the case, then states will explain that in their narrative. So the next indicator is indicator B2, dropout. Again, this is the percent of youth with IEPs dropping out of high school. This is used, there's different data used for this calculation. We're using IDEA 618 exit data. 618 data is reported annually by all states using EDFACS. And it also has a pretty simple formula to follow to calculate, which is just the number of youth who dropped out divided by the number of youth who exited high school that year. States report a percentage using the number of youth ages 14 to 21 who exited special ed by either dropping out, divided by, again, that number of youth with IEPs who left high school in a given year. So that's kind of the calculation for indicator 2. The most critical part is what this data is good for. So why is it important to collect indicators B1 and B2 for states and local districts? It's really nice to be able to compare your district's performance with national and state results, and also other districts like yours or other schools like yours. Really, looking at the data helps you identify whether or not graduation and dropout rates are an area of concern. And maybe something that you would want to do some further analysis on or develop improvement plans based on this data. You're really wanting to know if your district exiters or the folks leaving your districts are having different rates of post-school engagement than youth who are all other youth leaving the district. So the next indicator is Part B, Indicator 13, and it's compliant and transition-rich IEPs. I like to talk about transition-rich IEPs. It really is the percent of youth, again, it's defined as the percent of youth ages 16 and above. The IEPs have to include appropriate measurable post-secondary goals, has to be updated annually. All the goals have to be based on age-appropriate transition assessment. Transition services, including the course of study, all have to be aligned with the post-secondary goals. Annual goals must support achievement or attainment or kind of moving in the direction of post-secondary goals. Students must be invited to IEP meeting, and if an outside agency needs to come in, then they need to be invited as well as get parents' permission for doing that. 13 is a compliance indicator. Targets have to be 100%. There's 8 requirements for indicator 13, and you can view those in the PowerPoint. They're pretty much what I just talked about, the measurable post-goal goals updated annually in the assessment. There's an indicator 13 checklist that helps states and local districts examine their IEPs to make sure they're meeting the requirements, and they include, again, the 8 components. Indicator 13 districts are really important to, Indicator 13 is really important to states and districts. It helps assure compliance with IDEA, but it also provides kind of minimal accountability structure for developing those transition-rich IEPs and services and supports that help engage youth while they're in school, preparing them for post-school education, training, employment, and independent living. So it's what we do while they're in school, and those are critical pieces to the next indicator, which is Part B, 14. So indicator Part B, 14 is post-school outcomes in employment and education. It's measured by, it's enrolled in higher education, engaged in competitive employment, engaged in some other post-secondary training and employment or other employment. These all have really specific definitions by the federal government. Some of the key highlights: to be considered enrolled in higher ed, you have to be enrolled full or part-time in the college or university or community college and completed at least 1 term. That's a really key piece. Competitive employment, working for pay at or above minimum wage, also with us in a setting with others who are non-disabled. Key pieces are 20 hours a week for 90 days or more. Other post-secondary ed training consists of all the other education opportunities besides higher education, and other employment is the other work opportunities. The key piece there is you have to just be employed for 90 days, so that counts for all those folks who are working at home or for their family farms. So for reporting purposes, states will report 5 numbers and then 3 measures. So they have a measure A, B, and C. Measures A, B, and C really are just a combination of the 5 numbers. For district level folks, the critical numbers are the enrolled in higher education, the number competitively employed, the number in post-secondary ed and training, other employment, and then the 5th category, which is not actually required for federal reporting but is important for youth, is the youth that are not engaged. So states either collect by census or sample, meaning that they collect for all youth, or they just do a sample of youth in their state. So data is collected on youth who exit at least 1 year. They've graduated with a regular diploma or a certificate or any other. They may have aged out or dropped out or were expected to return but did not. And so the state is state-defined data source. Some do survey, some do other types of method collecting. So most states are doing surveys. Some states are using longitudinal data systems, but for the most part, they're doing surveys. The majority of states are collecting data via census as opposed to a sample, but there are still some states out there doing samples. The key piece is you're looking to ensure that data are you have a representative sample of folks for those states doing samples. Again, just to reiterate, they report annually on percentages A, B, and C. Leavers can only be counted once in each category. The states are going to describe how they've ensured that the the survey data are valid and reliable, and that's an important piece to look for in the SPP APR. Most states collect with some form of survey methodology, again, like phone or in person. Why it's important, post-school outcomes are important really because it informs program improvement planning by seeing what your former students are doing and what they've done well and where improvements could be made. You know, data can be analyzed by gender, by race, ethnicity, disability categories, or exit status. And it's really important to track how your leavers are doing over time in order to see if the services and supports that we provided while youth were in school were effective. States can explore those in-school experiences and which of those have influenced their post-school outcomes, and many states are starting to move in that direction, which is really cool. So post-school outcome is kind of that ultimate measure of what the effectiveness of what you have done while they're in school.